The Manosphere, how the red pill, game, and the internet are revalorizing masculinity for the 21st century. Written by Ironwood. Narrated by Jack Napier. The Manosphere, A New Hope for Masculinity by Ironwood. Copyright 2012-2013 Ironwood. ian.ironwood@gmail.com. For my father, my brothers, and my sons, the most important men in my life. One gives me wisdom, one gives me camaraderie, one gives me courage. All give me strength. Author's foreword. What is the Manosphere? What little is written about the Manosphere that's not actually in the Manosphere has usually been written by its opponents. A cursory glance might give the casual observer the impression that it's just a bunch of cranky old angry conservative men who want to go back to the 1950s. Terms like misogynistic and anti-woman and hate-mongers and worse have been leveled at the bloggers who make up the Manosphere. In some cases, the harsh terms seem justified. In others, they are decidedly not. Indeed, more often than not, the critics are so enraged by the challenge to some of their basic precepts that they cannot get over their own sense of outrage enough to see the validity of the content and its importance. The Manosphere often sees that kind of reactionary response to its discussions. The men there are used to it. All too often it is the standard response from women to men when they try to reasonably discuss matters of importance and subjects of interest to their agenda. Instead of participating in a frank discussion about gender relations, appreciating that there are, in fact, two sexes involved, many feminists and misguided sympathizers assume that any criticism of feminism from men is automatically worthy of condemnation and derision, and make a point of informing the men in question how misguided and ignorant they are, and how they probably don't like gays or black people either, and live in their mother's basement and never got touched by a girl. That impression would be highly misleading. The Manosphere is more than that. Far more. If you get distracted by the rhetoric, you're missing the important stuff. And that important stuff is mushrooming in importance. For those who are unfamiliar with this corner of the internet, the Manosphere is the nascent and evolving collection of blogs discussing topics of masculine interest and men's issues. Every day, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of men visit these sites in search of wisdom and understanding about what it means to be a male in the 21st century, particularly in the face of a culture irrevocably changed by feminism. Trying to draw a tighter circle around the phenomenon is difficult, but I think I've hit upon a good metaphor to describe it. The Manosphere is like a comet. I don't mean that in the usual metaphorical sense, wherein it would be compared to a rarely seen, spectacular, and undeniable phallic event, portending great changes and the end of empires. No, I mean it in the literal sense, informed by science. The Manosphere is like a comet in that it is essentially a dirty snowball. In case you fell asleep before that particular show came on the Discovery Channel, the head of a comet, broken down to its constituent components, is a dirty snowball. A mixture of rock, dust, and ice attached to a common center of local mass on a common trajectory across the solar system. Comets spend most of their life dutifully plodding through the outer reaches of our local stellar neighborhood. lurking in the Oort cloud far beyond our notice. But the sun's gravity relentlessly lures the dirty snowballs back into the light of a periodic basis. As the comet gets nearer to the sun, the solar radiation fans out the dust and ice from the dirty snowball into a brilliant tail. But it's still just a dirty snowball when you get up close. And the Manosphere is like that. The memes and the ideas behind it have been there all along, in the silence of the cultural Oort cloud, the invisible, indefinable gravitational center of the Manosphere is no less than masculinity itself. There has been an unease about masculinity, a recognition of crisis by the friends and foes of men, particularly in the face of changing femininity, that has been around for decades. Now, the signs and symptoms of this unease were as clear as portents and omens, murky and misunderstood. Only when the irregular mass got exposed to the strong energy of the internet did it start to show itself. And now, the tail of that metaphorical comet is starting to be seen in the sky by those who know to look. Okay, enough with the tortured metaphors. I'll be returning to this one so often you'll get sick of it. When trying to pin down just what constitutes the Manosphere, suddenly things get complicated. Like many other social or intellectual movements, just where it begins and ends depends entirely on your perspective. But after long investigation and consideration, I believe the best and most useful definition of the Manosphere is this: a collection of internet blogs, cultural discussion groups, interpersonal interactions, and digital clubhouses whose focus revolves around issues and interests common to men and masculinity. That covers a lot of territory, but so does a comet's tail. The Manosphere is often split by its critics into two broad areas: the men's right advocates, MRAs, groups advocating for masculine issues like fair child custody, divorce, alimony, and visitation laws for fathers, equitable sentencing between the genders for similar crimes, combating falsely made allegations of rape, and the pickup artists, PUAs, groups and individuals advocating the best ways of removing the panties and inhibitions of women for the purpose of sexual seduction. But while both of those points of mass are vital and important to the Manosphere, they do not define it. Men's issues and interests go beyond that, and often into some intriguing, anthropologically speaking, areas including politics, religion, economics, psychology, philosophy, sociology, and beyond. Both the PUA communities and the MRA communities are legitimate and valued voices within the greater Manosphere, particularly since their interests often overlap, particularly on the subject of sex. Sex, you see, is a near universal masculine interest and male issue. We had a meeting. It was unanimous. Since most men have sex with women, but not all, there are plenty of gay men lurking in the Manosphere, despite the soft homophobia that abounds because they're dudes too and struggle with most of the same things straight dudes do. A lot of talk about sex concerns women, since feminism is such a powerful force in the lives of many Western women. A primary focus of the Manosphere's discussions about feminism revolve around the effect it has had on men and masculinity. Spoiler alert, the discussions are rarely known for their congratulatory positivity. Not all the Manosphere is anti-feminist, and few parts are legitimately anti-woman. Accusations of misogyny, while overblown, have legitimate basis. But then again, some of the voices in the Manosphere belong to men who have been savagely treated by women. And the blatant misandry on feminist sites like Jezebel is at least as appalling from a social perspective. Yet, men's issues are not even acknowledged as rising to the level of social concern for most feminists. In the context of gender feminism, as it has evolved, it is impossible for straight men to be victims. The oppressors cannot be the oppressed. And even if they are, the suffering of women trumps the suffering of men. No one blames a female rape victim for her misandry, man-hating, in light of the psychological and emotional trauma she has endured. Yet, a man who has been emotionally or psychologically abused, who has had his children taken from him, who has been denied justice in a system that favors women in domestic issues, who has been financially ruined and socially devastated by a woman to the point where an actual physical rape by the cellmate of your choice would be preferable, in all honesty, that man is considered a misogynist and a whiner by his feminist-leaning critics, if he dares voice his anger and rage. Until, in rare cases, he is described as a disturbed loner with a troubled domestic past in the news report covering the aftermath of his shooting rampage. The Manosphere is an angry place. Feminists love to talk dismissively about the anger there, as if male anger invalidates any reasonable point behind the anger. But that anger is understandable by any objective measure. That's because our culture has treated men as a class very poorly while asking so much from them. The anger in the Manosphere isn't, as some critics claim, merely a reaction to the loss of male privilege or a fear of strong women or other tired chestnuts. It's real. It's palpable. There is a profound sense of loss, of displacement, of betrayal, and yes, anger, in the men who have taken up the keyboard to discuss gender issues from the XY perspective. For the last 40 years, men have been trying to adapt to the chaotic results of the sexual revolution and the dictates of feminism, and at long last, they are getting fed up. But don't think that the Manosphere is merely the haven of bitter divorcees and rejected losers. The Manosphere is far more than that. It is, in a very real sense, the re-establishment of the intellectual underpinnings of an unapologetically new patriarchal culture in the West. It is a repository of wisdom specific to masculine endeavors, and it attracts angry, passionate men who are dedicated to their cause. History is replete with lessons about just what can happen when that occurs. As the Manosphere's tail begins to grow and glow, it has the potential power to be a guiding hand for the young man struggling with his masculinity, a library for the young adult establishing a mating strategy, a married man, refuge and counsel in troubled times, and a mature man's opportunity to expound on the lessons he learned in his life, informing and initiating a new generation of men into the world. Within this comet, you will find experience and perspectives that have brought profound insight and wisdom to thousands of men who were deprived of that from their own fathers by fate and circumstance. This isn't the first time a men's movement has gotten started in the West, of course. As far back as the late 1970s, inspired by feminism's women liberation, there were parallel groups forming for men's liberation, although there wasn't much consensus on just what that meant. Mostly, it was a simple transference of feminist ideals to men and masculinity. The problem was, the two were fundamentally incompatible, especially once gender feminism came along, and even the most devout male feminist had to acknowledge that they had little idea what to do with that knowledge in the greater context of the gender wars. Every time men got together to discuss their issues, if they weren't gay, they were treated by women with suspicion at best and with misandry at worst. Masculinity was under full attack from all sides, and the only one who seemed to be sticking up for the men as men was Asa Barber's men column in Hugh Hefner's Playboy magazine. In the 1980s, the mythopoetic movement attempted to steer masculine identity into the spiritual and psychological, thanks to the influence of Joseph Campbell's work on mythology, like his seminal Hero with 1,000 Faces, and books lamenting the loss of the masculine spirit, like Iron John and Fire in the Belly. The late 1980s and early 1990s was the age of the drum circle and the sweet lodge for the men's movement. Unfortunately, as empowering as that was, eventually you crawled out of the sweat lodge and you were still the same dude with the same problems at work and a troubled marriage, and now you were dehydrated. Mythopoetics was transformative to many men, myself included, but part of that transformation was the mystic realization that it didn't matter how at peace we each were with our penis. The rest of the world was still out to get it. The men's movement of the 1990s included a lot of IPOs and money and therapy, when you could afford it, and a lot of dudes could. It was the dawn of the digital age and the age of the metrosexual. Suddenly, as everyone was getting filthy rich off of electrons and bright ideas, your feelings about your father and masculine social expectations paled in comparison to the allure of using your bonus check to upgrade to a sports car, a bigger condo, 3 weeks in Kobo, or even consider marriage. But not seriously. Of course, money didn't make the core issues afflicting masculinity go away. It just distracted us from them pleasantly. By the turn of the century, our pursuit of a fully developed, scalable global digital infrastructure was sadly overtaken by events, and suddenly, our undeveloped, poorly designed masculinity was on our collective mind again as we faced the fresh horrors of the 21st century. Only now we had the internet. The early seeds of the modern manosphere can be traced to the Usenet newsgroups of the late 1980s, particularly the alt.men family of newsgroups. That's where the first pioneering discussions online began. That's where the manosphere began, even though it wasn't known by that name. As it developed, it transformed with the technology, becoming in turn Yahoo news groups, mailing lists, websites, and eventually blogs. But the seeds of the idea were always there. Wouldn't it be cool if we had a place we could go and talk and be honest about the horse shit we made through on a daily basis and just be dudes? It was the blogs that really galvanized the manosphere and made it into what it is now becoming. The blogs were the points of mass for discussion and often begat other blogs, books, discussion groups, and the like about masculinity that fanned out into the long tail of the manosphere. Some took off and attracted hundreds of thousands of readers. Some sputtered out and closed shop as their authors became more sophisticated or opted out, or both. At this point, as I discuss later in the book, limiting discussion of the manosphere to just the blogs misses the fact that the internet is just one facet of an emerging masculine consensus. But intellectually, the blogs were the center of the manosphere comet, and still are. Starting at the core of the snowball, you can find some very distinct groups and philosophies. Of course, the MRAs are a prominent one, as are the PUAs, but there are other proponents of masculinity and male issues that you couldn't not include. The old married guys, OMGs, for instance, and the men going their own way, MGTOW, and the traditional Christian conservatives, and the hundreds of sites devoted to the pursuit of game would also, by definition, have to be included. But so would sites specifically on fatherhood, marriage, custody and divorce, men's health, and male-oriented economics. Just because a blogger isn't bitching about how badly he got taken in his divorce doesn't mean he isn't part of the manosphere. A couple of the more racy sports sites could be included, as could a number of blogs on lifestyles associated with the military, motorsports, precision machinery, firearms, and construction work. Several porn sites would easily make the list, as a collection of blogs and news groups centering around masculinity and male issues, sex is a primary topic. That's because sex is a male issue, just as reproductive freedom is a female issue. So the manosphere talks about sex a lot. If you add in the massive number of male-oriented sports sites, car sites, and other male-dominated interest sites, then the manosphere becomes vast, like the tail of a comet. Considering a site about sleeping more frequently with your wife is certainly a manosphere site near the head of the comet. But is a site about fantasy football? Why, yes. Yes, it is. A blog discussing the mythopoetic nature of masculinity is clearly in the manosphere. But is a Mustang Owners Club discussion board a part? Oh, my wee. The popular blog Hooking Up Smart, penned by a woman for women, is considered a very important part of the manosphere. But is an anti-feminist site? Again, yes. Are all the manosphere blogs written by evangelical Christian white men? No. There are prominent atheists, Jews and pagans writing about male issues from their perspective as well. Is the manosphere a conservative bastion? Perhaps. But there are plenty of progressive bloggers in the manosphere too. One is writing this book. This book will deal mostly with the head of the dirty snowball, those parts of the manosphere that clearly identify themselves as such. But it should always be kept in mind that this book is intended as a survey and an introduction, not a comprehensive guide or exhaustive report. Hell, I'm not even a journalist, so don't hold this book up to a journalistic standard, if there are any left. I'm a writer using a pseudonym. More importantly, I'm a dude, and I'm on a mission. I'm not alone. For every Royce or Roosh Fee style PUA Jedi Master out there, there are also thousands of men who participate in small ways, passionate, not about hooking up with a succession of hot chicks, for instance, but perhaps passionate about the bond they shared with their father over professional baseball, or how their relationship with their brothers changed when they got married, or how difficult it can be to be a man in a predominantly female office and distinguish yourself without being attacked for sexism. Masculinity doesn't stop with our dicks. It sprays out messily all over the place. That's the manosphere. That's the dirty snowball. You rarely know where it begins and ends. The more you try to touch it, the more it defies your definitions and resists your capability to be confined. And the moment you say something definitive about it, there are 100 exceptions to the rule that make your attempt moot or foolhardy. But if we go with the dirty snowball model, then you can figure out what the manosphere is the same way you find a comet in the sky. You back up enough until you can see the unifying principle, and then you agree that everything more or less in that area that is a part of that thing can probably be safely determined to be that thing. And in this case, the unifying principle happens to be men and masculinity. Beyond that, all bets are off.